UFC Fight Night Vegas 81, Yusuff versus Barboza takes place this weekend, and I'm going to go through the entire card, starting with the early prelims, ending with the main event, giving my prediction and breakdown for every single fight on the card, starting with the early prelim opener of Ashley Yoder versus Emily Ducote. Obviously going to have to go with Emily Ducote here over Ashley Yoder. Ashley Yoder is 8-8 in the UFC. On a 2-fight losing streak, she's lost 4 out of her last 5 fights, only winning against Miranda Granger. She even lost to Randa Marcos in that time of her losing. She's had a long time off. She's been out for over 2 years. No idea why she's still in the UFC. Emily Ducote hasn't been doing much better herself. 12-8 as a record, also on a 2-fight losing streak. However, she fought against Angela Hill and Lupita Godinez. And outside of that, I do think she's somewhat of a decent fighter. So I am going to go with Emily Ducote here over Ashley Yoder because she's not 8-8. She's not Ashley Yoder. She's not 35 years of age, been out for 2 and a bit years. Got to go with Emily Ducote here. I don't know how this is even a question of a matchup. We move on. Up the card, Chris Gutierrez versus Heili Alateng. Now, Chris Gutierrez dodged a little bit of a bullet here. Montel Jackson pulled out of the fight. Heili Alateng has stepped up to take this fight. Or he might have had a fight and they shimmied it over to this fight against Chris Gutierrez. But Heili Alateng is alright, you know. He's not even that bad. I'm not going to trash him as if he's some terrible fighter. But he's getting wins over Kevin Kroom and Chad Anheliger and all of these types of fighters. Lost to Casey Kenny, went to a draw with Gustavo Lopez, who is terrible himself. I just think Chris Gutierrez is on a different level of unranked bantamweight than, well, he's ranked Chris Gutierrez because he beat Frankie Edgar. But I think he's on a different level to Heili Alateng in terms of striking. I think he'll play the outside game pretty well. It's not like Heili Alateng has a crazy amount of finishing potential if you're not named Kevin Kroom. So I don't think he's going to be able to catch Chris Gutierrez. I reckon Chris Gutierrez is going to play at range, chop the low kicks, tap it in with front kicks and stuff like that, and win this fight by decision 30-27 or 29-28. We move on. Up the card, Irina Alekseeva versus Melissa Dixon. Now, a lot of people are picking Melissa Dixon here. The majority of people on Tapology are picking Melissa Dixon because she does have a win over a really good opponent on the regional scene. I'm going to go with the underdog of Irina Alekseeva. I think she's got a bit more grit on the feet. She beat Stephanie Egger by submission, and Stephanie Egger is like a judoka national champ or something along those lines in Switzerland. So she's pretty good at grappling herself, has fought some pretty good opponents as well in the UFC herself. And Irina Alekseeva beat her, and beat her pretty convincingly in the first round. Little bit of a weird situation as to how it ended up in that position. However, I think she's got a bit more grit. And Melissa Dixon, 5-0, undefeated prospect, coming into the UFC. You can never trust an undefeated women's prospect in the UFC. Hasn't really beaten anyone good. Had a bit of a hit-and-miss amateur career as well. She's 32 years of age, making her debut. I know Alekseeva's not that young either, but even still. She has a win over a 7-0 opponent who's now 8-1. Who is seen as something really good on the regional scene, which is why I believe a lot of the people on Tapology are picking this fight against Alekseeva. They're picking Melissa Dixon because of this. However, if you watch the fight, she was getting absolutely dominated, found herself on top position straight into mount, and then the referee steps in so prematurely for a TKO finish as the opponent's literally trying to defend herself and improve her position. So it was a really weird situation. Melissa Dixon did get the win, don't get me wrong, but she was getting absolutely pieced up in that fight really badly and showed terrible stand-up. I don't think she's going to do all that in this fight. I think Alekseeva's going to have a bit of a stand-up advantage and be strong enough in the clinch to keep this one standing as well. So I'm going to go with Irina Alekseeva over Melissa Dixon. We move on. Up the card, Terrance McKinney versus Brendon Marotte. Terrance McKinney was supposed to be fighting Chris Duncan. I was going to pick him against Chris Duncan anyway because Duncan couldn't finish an opponent who had one arm after the first 2 minutes of their fight, even though he did cause that injury to him still. I didn't think much of Chris Duncan in terms of his speed especially, so I thought McKinney could catch him. Brendon Marotte, awful regional fighter, beat no one good. 26 years old, so he's obviously getting started in his career, trains at the New England Cartel, so he's at a good gym. But his last opponent was 11-20. And it wasn't even a short notice replacement opponent. His last opponent was 11-20. He's 8-1. If that's the type of opponents they're finding for you, is this a New England cartel thing? Maybe it's like a Northeast US type situation here with these can-fed fighters that get into the UFC, but she went to a split decision with an 8-4 opponent, lost to a 5-1 opponent in Adley Edwards, who's not that bad, but he's now 9-3. Now on a 2-fight losing streak at Bellator. Fought some decent opponents, but still lost to both of them. I'm going to have to go with Terrance McKinney here. I think he's going to have a speed advantage. I don't see him being out-grappled, and that's the way that a lot of Brendon Marotte's wins come by. I mean, he has a rear naked choke, KO, TKO. So yeah, I saw him take a guy down, choke him out, split decision against an 8-4. I just don't trust him to win this one, fighting an 11-20 opponent before you get your UFC debut, and it's on short notice for you. Do I trust you to break Terrance McKinney in the later rounds either? Not on short notice, I don't. So I'm going to have to go with Terrance McKinney getting this one done by TKO. Another can for McKinney. We moving on. Up the card. Tainara Lisboa versus Ravena Oliveira. This is a tricky one, but I'm going to go with Tainara Lisboa. Not much to go off of here. Although Tainara Lisboa has won in the UFC before against Jessica Rose Clark and has had some time off since then. So, you know, she's had 5 months off, going to be a bit more used to things. Got that paycheck as well that's going to add to like a nutritionist. And now it's time to take it serious. We're in the UFC. That type of mindset that could be a difference in this fight compared to her debut. Didn't fight anyone good on the regional scene whatsoever. Fought absolutely awful opponents. But this 7-1 Ravena Oliveira fighter as well hasn't fought anyone good on the regional scene. A bunch of 0-0 opponents making their debut. The last 2 0-0 opponents she fought have gone on to become 0-2. Like, what do I do here? Yeah, I mean, she hasn't beaten anyone who has any evidence of being good whatsoever. She won against an 8-5 opponent in the 3rd round. And by the way, that 8-5 opponent that she fought is 17-27. But boxing included as well into her record. She's got a ton of losses. Was doing boxing. What are we doing here? Women's MMA. But yeah, I'm definitely going to go with Tainara Lisboa here. We move on. Up the card, Darren Elkins versus TJ Brown. I'm going to go TJ Brown. You want to know why? The performance he had against Bill Algeo, even though he lost that fight because Bill Algeo at one moment was able to latch up that rear naked choke out of nowhere, he was doing all right in that fight. Where I was thinking before the fight, I was thinking, you know what? He's going to beat... Bill Algeo's going to whoop up on TJ Brown. Different levels of fighter completely. But TJ Brown showed in that fight that he's all right. And I was like, oh God, is my pick going to be wrong here? And then Bill Algeo latches up the rear naked choke in the 2nd round after hurting him. So I'm going to go with TJ Brown over Darren Elkins. Nothing personal against Darren Elkins, but he fights like a geriatric old man these days. He is tough, and he's going to have that toughness. But TJ Brown can go 3 hard rounds, trains with Bryce Mitchell in the grappling, so I don't think he's going to be out-wrestled by Darren Elkins at any point in this fight either. Beat Eric Silva, who was 9-1, didn't expect him to get that win. Fought Shiley and Nerdy Mbeke to a 29-28 very close decision. Beat Charles Rosa, Kai Kamaka in an interesting decision. He's been around. He's coming into his prime. Darren Elkins is 39 years of age. Taken so much damage against Jonathan Pierce. Got whooped up for 3 rounds in that one. Beat Tristan Connolly, but it's Tristan Connolly. Derek Minner. Eduardo Gregori, who was awful and an absolute can crusher coming into the UFC. I just think he's taken too much damage in his career, and TJ Brown is tough enough not to get finished and not to get broken. And if they're in a fight against each other to a decision, I trust in TJ Brown being able to be smart enough to land those big shots and get the takedowns where he needs them. So I'm going to go TJ Brown, way more consistent and in his prime, not a geriatric old man. No offense to Darren Elkins, but I don't think he's all that. We move on. Up the card, Christian Rodriguez versus Cameron Saaiman. Now, Cameron Saaiman, if I'm not mistaken, is also an underdog here. So I might go for another underdog on this card. Cameron Saaiman, is he an underdog here? He is an underdog. I'm going to have to go with Cameron Saaiman as an underdog, am I not? This is a very even matchup. But the way I see it is this. they're not going to really dominate each other in the grappling. In fact, if I had to guess anyone to do a bit more with the grappling, I'd say maybe Christian Rodriguez is a little better positionally and with the actual takedowns themselves. But in terms of implementing that grappling to get damage points, I'd go with Cameron Saaiman. He's really good at ground and pound. He throws up submissions when he needs to as well. I think he's a lot better if it does go to the... If there's a fight where they both grapple and it goes to the scorecards, I'd trust in Saaiman getting the nod a little bit more because he's a little bit more vicious with it than Rodriguez is, who's a bit more positional and set up something really slowly and latch it up. I'm going to go with Cameron Saaiman on the grappling department and on the feet. I think he's way better than Christian Rodriguez. I don't think Rodriguez is all that on the feet. He's all right, but Cameron Saaiman, I think, is just way better. A lot more dynamic, a lot more versatile, a lot more wild and risk-taking as well, which I think is a big deal here. I think if there's anyone who's going to get a finish by TKO, it's going to be Cameron Saaiman. He has a much higher finish potential on the feet, in my opinion. And, again, Christian Rodriguez didn't fight all that many great opponents coming into the UFC. And Cameron Saaiman, although he didn't fight the best of opponents either, there were some decent guys there, you know, on the Contender Series. Beat Manny Martinez. Stephen Kozlow was 6-0 coming into the UFC. 5-1 opponent on the Contender Series. Not that many great ones outside of that. I'm going to go with Cameron Saaiman, though, for all the reasons I've listed. Plus, younger, I believe. Let me double check that. Younger by far, by the way. Taller than I think his height suggests. I think his height is actually underselling him a little bit here. And Christian Rodriguez has been somewhat inactive in comparison. Hasn't fought since earlier this year in April. Nothing wrong with that. But he had a fight against Cameron Saaiman in July. Got injured. Had to pull out. Cameron Saaiman took a fight on that card. And now he's fighting again anyway. And he took no damage in that fight against Terrance Mitchell, who he dominated in the first round. So I'm going to go Cameron Saaiman getting this one done. I can trust him to not have had an injury in the middle of training camp either. We move on. Up the card. Edgar Chairez versus Daniel Lacerda. I'm going to go with Edgar Chairez again. I picked him the first time. He was on his way to winning the first time. Lacerda clowned his way out of it. I don't know why he still signed. I don't know why he got a fight in the first place against Edgar Chairez. He doesn't belong in the UFC. I don't like this for Daniel Lacerda. I think he goes too hard in the early rounds. He was on his way to potentially losing that early round against Edgar Chairez anyway, and that's his best round. So if this doesn't end in the first round, it's going to go into the second and third, and Lacerda always slows down in those rounds. And Edgar Chairez doesn't, and had a really close fight with Tatsuro Taira. I reckon he gets this one done. I think he gets this one done in the later rounds by TKO or submission or something along those lines. I think Lacerda wanted out of there against Edgar Chairez, but made a controversy out of it so he could have another chance to land a wheel kick in round one again, which is what he's going for every time. So maybe he one-offs it and lands that spinning kick. Who knows? But if it does go anyway other than a massive random KO in round one, it's going to be Edgar Chairez winning that fight 8 out of 10 times. Way more consistent, way more durable, way better cardio, way better across the distance. I'm going Edgar Chairez. And again, he had him in that choke in round one anyway. So I'm going to go Edgar Chairez winning this one by third or second round stoppage. We move on. Up the card, Michel Pereira versus Andre Petroski. I'm actually going to go with Michel Pereira. I have a few reasons for this. Welterweights are better than middleweights by far. Always have been. Look at the top of the middleweight division. Whittaker used to be a former welterweight. Vettori was a former welterweight. Duplessis fought at welterweight on the regional scene. Vettori, I think I just listed him, but still. Whittaker, Strickland was a former welterweight as well. I think just on a technical level, they're just better than these middleweights. So I like the idea of welterweights moving up to middleweight in general. And Andre Petroski looked awful against Gerald Meerschaert. I think he looked terrible against Gerald Meerschaert. I didn't like that performance. And not to mention, I like that he's stepping up because he sees this as a big name fight and an opportunity for him and he likes to stay active. He fought 2 months ago. And that round in round 3 was nearly a 10-8 round, by the way. That was so nearly a 10-8 round in terms of the damage he took. And he's fighting 8 weeks later. I don't like that. He took this fight on short notice. I don't like that either because I like a guy to have a full camp if he's going to break Pereira in the later rounds. And even on a full camp, he was getting broken in the later rounds by Gerald Meerschaert. So I know Gerald Meerschaert's the GOAT, but I think Michel Pereira's got this one. I think he's got this one in the bag. I reckon he gets this one done potentially by TKO, maybe even by decision, by losing the third round not so dominantly, but winning the first two on the striking. I think he's going to have a massive striking advantage. I didn't like the way Andre Petroski was throwing in the first and second round against Meerschaert. Looked very rudimentary, very unskilled, closing his eyes, winging bombs, hoping for the best. I'm going to go Michel Pereira. I think he's got much better striking, much better technique, and at the end of the day, he does have a win over Santiago Ponzinibbio. The Fialho win has not aged well whatsoever, but he beat Chaos Williams. He beat Nico Price, Zelim Imadiev. You know what I'm saying? Like, these are good fighters. Some of them can grapple, and he gets back up when he gets taken down. He's very explosive. He's like a Johnny Walker at welterweight. You know, you think you can get him down because he doesn't have the technique of the wrestling, but he just has these strong hips that kicks himself back up to his feet. I think if he takes this patient, he might get a quick KO over Andre Petroski. So I'm going to go with Michel Pereira by TKO over Andre Petroski. I didn't like Petroski's last performance, and he's immediately fighting again on short notice. Don't like that whatsoever. We move on. Up the card. Jonathan Martinez versus Adrian Yanez. I'm going to go with Jonathan Martinez over Adrian Yanez. I like Adrian Yanez. I think his boxing was really good on the come-up. I was going to pick Rob Font to beat him, and I didn't because I saw the amount of damage that Marlon Vera did to Rob Font, and that's what I based it on. If he didn't take that damage against Marlon Vera and it was just like, who wins, Rob Font, Adrian Yanez, I would have said, you know what? Rob Font's going to beat him. I was initially leaning that way, and I switched because I saw his fucking damage he took against Vera, and I was like, no way anyone's going to be the same coming off of that beating. But we've seen over and over again, and that's not the case. Keita did the same thing. I thought he was going to be finished after the Holloway fight. Comes back and smokes Giga Chikadze over 5 rounds. Also a New England cartel fighter, by the way. That's a weird comparison. Either way, Jonathan Martinez did lose to Davy Grant, but he got caught by Davy Grant, and he dropped Davy Grant in round 1 in that fight pretty badly. Got caught in round 2 by a big shot, put away. Ho-hum. You know what I'm saying? Not the best for him. Other than that, he's been on a 5-fight win streak. And Zviad Lazvishvili was 13-0. Alejandro Perez beat him. Vince Morales beat him. Cub Swanson whooped him so badly. And Swanson, even if you don't think he won against Hakeem Dawodu, held his own and made it a really close decision against Hakeem Dawodu in that fight. Said Nurmagomedov is no joke at all. And Jonathan Martinez not only was able to outwin those grappling exchanges at times, but tap at his legs on the feet. And I think Adrian Yanez, if there's one weakness that he could have, is dealing with low kicks and dealing with kicks in general. And that's what Davy Grant gave him a weakness with. And Davy Grant clearly won that decision against him. I have no idea how they gave it to Yanez. So I'm going to go with Jonathan Martinez over Adrian Yanez. Think he's got a lot better momentum right now. He's on a win streak. It's his time in his mind. Adrian Yanez is very dangerous himself. A little bit of a reach advantage here, but he's coming off a bad loss to Rob Font, a really bad loss. I think who's going to be more switched on in the first and who's going to carry that over into the later rounds. I'm going to go Jonathan Martinez. That's who I'm going to go with. So Jonathan Martinez gets this one done by decision, 29-28, very close, maybe a split, who knows. Just think he's got that edge in all areas over Adrian Yanez, other than the boxing, but he's got better kicks, in my opinion. We move on. Up the card, Jennifer Maia versus Vivian Araujo. I'm going to go with Jennifer Maia over Vivian Araujo. I think she's got way better boxing. Vivian Araujo is all right on the feet. I just think Jennifer Maia is a little bit more scrappy, a little bit more down to get down. She's younger. I know don't look it, but she's younger by a year than Vivian Araujo. She's fought the best of the best. Araujo's on a 2-fight losing streak. Jennifer Maia's on a 2-fight winning streak. I didn't like the way Vivian Araujo looked against Amanda Ribas at all. She looked all right against Grasso, to be fair, but she did lose pretty clearly. But Jennifer Maia looked good against Casey O'Neill. Boxed her up, exposed her, fraud checked her, get fucked. I reckon she'll win. I reckon she'll win this one pretty easily. Decision win for Jennifer Maia. Momentum's on her side. It's a coin flip anyway, but I'm going with Jennifer Maia. We move on. Up the card, Sodiq Yusuff versus Edson Barboza. Oh, God, what am I going to go for here? It's just like, I've had Edson Barboza as an underdog for so many weeks. But then a bunch of underdogs win in a row that don't make any fucking sense whatsoever. And I'm just like, it's not going to be another underdog main event in a row, is it? You know what I mean? It's so fucking annoying. This sport's so dumb the way it is, man. You know what I mean? Like, Strickland beats Adesanya. Grasso gets the rematch against Shevchenko with some absolute fuckery. Then Gamrot uses telekinesis on Fiziev's knee and explodes it in the middle of a fight for his underdog win. Green tags Dawson with a big shot. You know what? I'll go Edson Barboza over Sodiq Yusuff. Just think Edson Barboza's got a bit of momentum right now. Much larger than Sodiq Yusuff. Much larger than Sodiq Yusuff. Going to be a bit of a size disparity in there. I don't know how I trust him to go 5 rounds, but then at the end of the day, I didn't really like Sodiq Yusuff's performance against Chairez either. But then again, Edson Barboza didn't like his performance against Giga Chikadze. But Giga Chikadze's really rangy on the feet, and Yusuff has to get stuck in. And if you're trying to get stuck in on Edson Barboza, it's not going to work out too well, in my honest opinion. Barboza's got a 4-inch reach advantage over him. Taller. I think more dangerous with his kicks. Sodiq Yusuff might have a punch power difference between the two of them, but there's something to be said about the fact that Sodiq Yusuff, although coming into his prime here, is coming off a win over Don Shanis, who just let himself get kneed to pieces in the clinch. I'm going to go Edson Barboza eventually finding something. I don't trust Sodiq Yusuff's chin. And don't get me wrong, Edson's one is not the best either. Edson's chin is not the best either. But the way I see it is this. Sodiq Yusuff has to get stuck in to fight. Caceres' performance wasn't all that, I didn't think. Didn't really land much to the head. Was just chopping at Caceres' legs. That's how he won that fight against Caceres, was the low kicks. I don't think you can trust in low kicks to win a fight for you against a guy like Edson Barboza. I think that's a no-brainer not to trust in yourself to do that. He's had some time off, Sodiq Yusuff. He's been out for a year. He's had injuries, and not just like, oh, his foot is swollen. No, like, I'm pretty sure he had a really bad spine injury, if I'm not mistaken. I'm just going to look it up right now just in case. Sodiq. He's also been doing a lot of social media stuff, which is never a good sign for a contender. Sodiq Yusuff injury. I'm fairly certain he had a pretty bad injury to his back or something. Oh, there you go. He suffered a spinal injury and required surgery. That's pretty weird, isn't it? That's pretty weird. Whereas Edson Barboza, yeah, that's not a good one, man. That's not a good one. Whereas Edson Barboza's got momentum right now. You know, he beat Billy Quarantillo, didn't take any damage. Normally, you get an Edson Barboza after a war or after he's been beaten up really badly. You know what I mean? This is a clean Barboza win. He's not taken any damage. He's got right back into camp after a bit of time off for himself. He's still looking in great shape. He's got a size, frame advantage. I'm going to go with Edson Barboza getting this one done on the feet. I just think Sodiq Yusuff, Arnold Allen was wobbling him. I know he looked good against Arnold Allen, but I don't trust Sodiq Yusuff's chin that much, in all honesty. When he gets hit by shots, he goes a bit jelly-legged, and I don't really like that for him. So, after a year off, and also you got to consider this as well when it comes to underdogs in these main events. Who's ready for a main event? You know what I mean? Sodiq Yusuff probably wasn't even like, this wasn't on the cards for him. It was supposed to be 3 rounds for Sodiq Yusuff, by the way, and Edson Barboza. They were supposed to be the co-main event, and then boom, they get bumped up to the main event a couple of weeks ago because the UFC can't find a main event for it. Who's going to be more ready to make that adjustment into the big spotlight from the co-main event? It's Edson Barboza. He's been around for so long. Sodiq Yusuff is young. He's only 13-2. I know you could look at records and say, well, Barboza's 23-11. He's not that good. But the experience that comes with that record for Barboza is crazy. And Sodiq Yusuff is young. He ain't really had the spotlight yet. His last fight was on a fight night card on the main card of Yan Xiaonan versus Mackenzie Dern. He's been on the main card of a pay-per-view before, I believe, against Gabriel Benitez, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not going to check that right now, but I think he was. But he's never really had this spotlight of a main event in the Apex. I'm going to go Edson Barboza over Sodiq Yusuff. I reckon he's a bit better on the feet. I think Edson Barboza is proven to be a better striker than Sodiq Yusuff. And he's not coming off a spinal injury, which he needed surgery for a year ago. We'll see how the UFC works, though, because any underdog that makes sense don't even happen. Only the ones that have no fucking sense to it whatsoever happen. And I never get a random leg explosion in the favour of my pick. It's always against my pick. Stupid fucking sport. Makes no sense. Coin flip it. You know what I mean? My opinion, though, very close to 50-50 fight. I'm leaning Edson Barboza. This is something you guys can agree with. Very close to 50-50 fight. Leaning towards Barboza anyway. He's a massive underdog. I'm going Edson Barboza. Like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Toodle pip. I'll see you later. Goodbye.